Good day, everyone! Kamusta ka mo? I am Karina J. Chavez, the reporter for this topic, which is the definition and types of joints. So the coverage of this discussion is the definition of joints, the types of joints, and their characteristics. So first, what is a joint? A joint is a point of contact between two bones, between bone and cartilage, or between bone and teeth. Joints are the areas where two bones are attached for the purpose of permitting the body parts to move. A joint, also called articulation or arthrosis, has significant function in the human body because it holds the skeleton together and supports our body's movement. Joints are classified structurally based on their anatomical characteristics and functionally based on the type of movement they permit. The joint's structural classification is based on two criteria. First is the presence or absence of a space between the articulating bones, which is a synovial cavity. Second is the type of connective tissue that binds the bones together. Functionally, joints are classified as one of the following types: synarthrosis, amphiarthrosis, and diarthrosis. So synarthrosis is an immovable joint, while amphiarthrosis is a slightly movable joint, and diarthrosis is a freely movable joint. Finally, joints are classified as one of the following types: the fibrous joints, the cartilaginous joints, and the synovial joints. So first is the fibrous joints. These joints has no synovial cavity, and the articulating bones are held very closely together by dense irregular connective tissue. That is why fibrous joints allow little or no movement. So there are three types of fibrous joints: sutures, syndesmoses, and interosseous membranes. Suture is a fibrous joint composed of a thin layer of dense irregular connective tissue. The sutures occur only between bones of the skull. Suture is classified functionally as synarthrosis. So when we say synarthrosis, it is an immovable joint. So suture can permit or allow movement. So one example of a suture is the corneal suture between the parietal and frontal bones. The irregular interlocking edges of sutures give them added strength and decrease their chance of fracturing. So next is syndesmosis, a fibrous joint in which there is a greater distance between the articulating surfaces and more dense irregular connective tissue than in a suture. The dense irregular connective tissue is typically arranged as a bundle and the joint permits limited movement, so it means functionally syndesmosis considered as amphiarthrosis. One example of a syndesmosis is the distal tibiofibular joint, where the anterior tibiofibular ligament connects the tibia and fibula that was shown in the picture. So next is the final category of fibrous joints, the interosseous membranes. Interosseous membranes is a substantial sheet of dense irregular connective tissue that binds neighboring long bones and permits slight movement. So same as syndesmosis, interosseous membranes also permits or allows slight movement. So it means that functionally, interosseous membranes is considered as amphiarthrosis also. So there are two principal interosseous membrane joints in the human body. One occurs between the radius and ulna in the forearm, and the other occurs between the tibia and fibula in the leg. So the next type is a cartilaginous joints. A cartilaginous joint lacks a synovial cavity and allows little or no movement. In cartilaginous joints, the articulating bones are tightly connected by either hyaline cartilage or fibrocartilage. The two types of cartilaginous joints are synchondrosis and symphysis. Symphysis is a cartilaginous joint in which the connecting material is hyaline cartilage. An example of a synchondrosis is the epiphyseal plate that connects the epiphysis and diaphysis of a growing bone. Functionally, a synchondrosis is a synarthrosis. So, synarthrosis, as I said earlier, is an immovable joint. So, it means that synchondrosis cannot produce movement. So, next is symphysis. This is the second type of cartilaginous joint in which the ends of the articulating bones are covered with hyaline cartilage, but a broad, flat disc of fibrocartilage connects the bones. Asymphysis is an amphiarthrosis, a slightly movable joint. So the third type of joints is synovial joint. In synovial joint, the bones forming the joint have a synovial cavity and are united by the dense irregular connective tissue of an articular capsule, and often by accessory ligaments. Synovial joints has a unique characteristic, for it has a synovial cavity between the articulating bones. The bones at synovial joint are covered by a layer of hyaline cartilage, called articular cartilage. Synovial joints are divided into 6 categories based on type of movement: planar, hinge, pivot, condyloid, saddle, and ball and socket. A sleeve-like articular capsule surrounds a synovial joint, encloses the synovial cavity, and unites the articulating bones. The articular capsule is composed of 2 layers, an outer fibrous membrane and an inner synovial membrane. Next is the articular cartilage. The bones at the synovial joint are covered by a layer of hyaline cartilage called articular cartilage. The cartilage covers the articulating surface of the bones with a smooth, slippery surface but does not bind them together. Articular cartilage is the one that reduces friction between bones in the joint during the movement and helps to absorb shock. Synovial or joint cavity. The synovial cavity is the presence of a space that allows a joint to be freely movable. Indeed, all synovial joints are classified functionally as diarthrosis. So synovial joints are freely movable joints. So here are the types of synovial joints: the planar joint, hinge joint, the pivot joint, the condyloid joint, the saddle joint, and ball and socket joint. Planar joint. Planar joints primarily permit back and forth and side-to-side movement between the flat surfaces of bones. The articulating surfaces of bones in a planar joint are flat or slightly curved. Hinge joint. In a hinge joint, the convex surface of one bone fits into the concave surface of another bone. As the name implies, hinge joints produce an angular, opening and closing motion like that of a hinge door. Next is a pivot joint. A pivot joint is monaxial because it allows rotation only around its own longitudinal axis. In a pivot joint, the rounded or pointed surface of one bone articulates with a ring formed partly by another bone and partly by a ligament. Next is the condyloid joint. A condyloid joint is a biaxial because the movement it permits is around 2 axes: flexion, extension, abduction, and adduction. In a condyloid joint or ellipsoidal joint, the convex oval-shaped projection of one bone fits into the oval-shaped depression of another bone. Saddle joint. In a saddle joint, the articular surface of one bone is saddle-shaped, and the articular surface of the other bone fits into the saddle, as a sitting rider would sit. A saddle joint is a modified condyloid joint, in which the movement is somewhat freer. Lastly, ball and socket joint. A ball and socket joint consists of the ball-like surface of one bone fitting into a cup-like depression of another bone. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you for watching, and I hope you learned a lot.